Hi, loves. Welcome back to the Aligned and Magnetic podcast. We are back with Ashley, and this is the second of a four-part series all about the professional coaching industry. For those of you who don't know, I'm an associate certified coach with the International Coach Federation and a certified facilitator of the Coach Approach Academy, where we pretty much give you everything that you need to become a certified coach and start your career, whether you're wanting to bring coaching to your current role or branch off on your own. Joining me in this series is Ashley from Ashley D Coaching, and she is also working toward her coach certification with the ICF, right?
I am. Hi.
Yes. So Ashley is a transformational life coach, as you heard in our last episode. She shared with us all about her journey in the coaching industry. So together, we really just want to bring awareness to what is coaching? I know it's like a super kind of airy-fairy, fluffy topic. There's not really a ton of rules and guidelines around it. So we're going to cover our experience, our thoughts and opinions on the industry, and really just try to help bring some clarity to what it is to be a professional coach and the certification process and all of that jazz. So anything you want to add to that, Ashley, before we start?
No, that sounds great. I'm excited to dive into this.
Me too. Okay, so I know we covered a little bit of this in our last episode, but I want to kind of start with, because the coaching industry is so fluffy, like I said, there's not really, if you ask, a number of coaches who are out there online saying I'm a coach, you're probably going to get a different answer as to what they believe coaching is, right? So let's start with, what was your idea or experience of coaching before going through coach training?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I love that at the beginning of every conversation I have with a prospective client, you ask them what do you know to be true about coaching? What does that mean to you? And what you hear sometimes can be really interesting. And I would say that it's aligned with, I think, how I envision coaching before I knew what it was. I thought that it was, when I think of coaching, I went to sport coaching, right? Like this coach that's come on team, this is your position, this is your role, this is how you execute it. Like almost like cheerleading, right? Like that rah, go, you can do this, blowing a whistle. And that is truthfully how I thought of coaching. And I didn't understand why people would invest a lot of money into it. But it was mainly just because I had zero clue what it actually was in real time.
I can totally resonate with that because my mom, who is the founder of the Coach Approach Academy, who will probably join us on an episode, I grew up with her going through coach training. She was studying at Royal Roads. She was all about coaching. She would even test her freaking coaching skills on us, which I don't really recommend, but I think it's a natural part of the coaching process when you're learning the skills. It's I just want to coach everybody. But yeah, even still growing up with that, I still was I still don't know what the fuck you do. I have no idea what she does. I'm why would people pay you to coach them? Because my idea of coaching as well was around sports. I'm okay, there's soccer coaches, football coaches, all of that stuff. So I love that you bring that up. And then, okay, so what do your clients / what did you expect when you were getting on a coaching call, or when your prospective clients or your clients get on a coaching call with you? What are some of those common themes then that come through?
Yeah, this is a good one because I think this is part of a larger conversation around what coaching isn't, right? Because people will come in and think that coaching is mentoring. They think that they're coming and you have some secret sauce that you're going to give to them to solve all their problems. So it's oh, I'm going to come to you for transformational life coaching or career coaching, and you're going to help me solve my career problems. And well, yes, that's true. I'm not the one really doing the work. And I think that's what people don't understand. So they come with this concept or idea of, oh, amazing, I'm going to come and you're an expert in this. And you're, I think I talked about this last podcast, the Paulo Freire gas methodology, right? Where you're pumping gas into the brain, you're pumping all this knowledge in. And in actuality, that's not what true coaching is, right? We're not there. We're not the experts just giving out information and advising and saying, do this, like do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and like listening to the client and solving their problems for them.
Yeah. From my experience and what I expected as well before I became certified in coaching, my first coach that I hired, my expectation was like, yeah, this person's marketing herself as a business coach. She's going to give me all the answers that I need to know about business coaching, and I'm going to be successful within, I don't know, like 6 months, because that's the marketing perspective that those were the words that she was choosing, to market her programs as. And while, yeah, like I got results, I found that approach actually took me down a very different path than maybe I would have. And there's no regrets, right? Like I learned what I learned. I'm happy that I got what I got. But I find that this approach of like being the expert and clients coming to expecting you to give them the answers, right, as this so-called expert, totally changes the learning experience. And not just that, but the pathway, because I think a lot of people, and especially my clients, I don't know if you can resonate with this, but we're highly impressionable. And so when we hear from somebody like, oh, do this to get clients, or like do this to make more money, or do this to become more confident, or do this to get better at your career, then we kind of are like, oh my God, that's the secret. That's the end all be all. I must do that, even if it feels wrong or incorrect in our body. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I actually have a lot of things that are coming up for me right now. And I guess I'll start with what works for one doesn't work for all. So just because some pathway worked for you, some methodology, some practice, whatever it is, doesn't mean it's necessarily going to work for me. And what's coming up for me as well is this idea around like the different methodologies in coaching, because, there's coaching that's solely focused on behavioral change, but without doing the underneath work, right? Without going like internally. It's just, how can we focus on changing that behavior? And I've told you in the last podcast, I've had some experience with a couple different coaching methodologies, and I'm just trying to like take pieces from all of them and put them together. But I see, there's like these pieces that just go straight to behavior, and then there's other ones that try to work internally. So when you have someone who comes to you, like they want this potentially a behavioral change, they just think that by you giving them the answers, they don't have to do the internal work to actually make the changes happen, or to like get, accomplish whatever goal they're trying to get to. So they come and it's like, oh, like I'm struggling with losing weight. And it's like, okay, what have you done? Well, I've tried this, this, and this. Okay, well, that hasn't worked. Try this now. And then they expect, oh, okay, I'll go off and get that. But it's like, no, like that's not actually what coaching is. Coaching is unpacking. Like what's been coming up for you? Like what are those like hiccups and bumps? Like those limiting beliefs that maybe you haven't like brought to your conscious, right? Because a lot of our stuff sits in the subconscious. And so there's just like different, I don't know, coaching methodologies that can bring us to different places. I think I kind of got a little bit off topic there, but
It's okay. Yeah.
the nature of the beast.
Yeah, no, I love where this is headed, because something that really helped me to truly lock this in was human design. Because if you look at a human design chart, and like you can think about this in terms of the body as well, and I'll get there in a second, but a human design chart, like you've got 5 different types, but within the 5 different types, you have people's environment, which I think there's like 6 or something. You have people's cognition, you have people's determination, you have the gates, the channels, the this, the that. There's so many different elements that create infinite different results of like a human design or like a human being that make up what somebody is, right? And if you want to use astrology, but there's so many different combinations. If you want to get into like data probability, there's a number of different combinations that can make up a human being. If you want to look at the physical, there's like your blood type, there's your body size, there's like the different genes that make up who you are, different like genetic predispositions or like, your environment, all of these different things. So it's like, wouldn't we treat, like, instead of giving people a one size fits all answer, which is what a lot of, I think, the world kind of caters to, wouldn't it make sense to get each individual being and really work with that person instead of just slapping a band-aid fix on everything and just telling them like, here, go do this, here, go do this,
Yeah. And I think that there's another element to that too. And I think I learned this through coaching is, someone can come into coaching and how far are they really going to get by you giving them the answers and then them just going and executing? But if you think about it, like how much further can they get when they come to the answers, when they find these discoveries, when they have their own conclusions about where they need to go themselves? Like how much further can they get in their process when it comes from within them and not, prescribed to them by somebody else?
Absolutely. And what's coming to mind right now for me is the neuroscience of coaching.
Yeah. So thinking of the neuroscience of coaching, right? So I'm thinking of Brooke Castillo, who has her, like what she calls the method. So the idea that like your thoughts affect your feelings, which affect your actions, which affect your results. And so many people always go right to action. So, I need to lose weight, so I'm going to like exercise more. But the thing is, your actions have been influenced by your feelings, which have been influenced by your thoughts, which are these like heavily deep-seated like neural networks and pathways that have been conditioned over time, like ultimately since childhood. So if you're not like getting back at the root and really unpacking and working and kind of sitting with like, okay, what are the feelings associated with this action I'm taking or I want or desire to take? And how is that driven by the thoughts that you're having? Like, what are those like subconscious thoughts you're having? Like, you're not really going to get anywhere. Like, I think that this is when you're able to unpack that, like, this is like the essence of what true coaching is being able to unpack and rework those neural pathways, which takes time.
Absolutely. And there's two things coming up for me right now. Like, a lot of people, they'll do the thing, right? They'll like work out their whole lives and they'll still struggle with weight. And a lot of it, so not only can our thoughts influence our actions, but our thoughts can also influence our frequency. And so if we take an energetic approach to this and we look at Joe Dispenza's work, which is like your thoughts and so there's a whole thing around like there's your spirit, there's your mental state, there's your emotional thing, and then there's the physical, right? And all physical manifestations are a result of our emotions, our thinking, and the spiritual aspect as well. And so when something's wrong in those other layers, like the spiritual, like the soul, the mental, or the emotional level, that's when they start to come through the physical level. We experience those physical symptoms, right? Or lack of physical results. Like whatever we are trying to make happen in our physical reality, and if it's not working or if it's not happening, we need to look at those other layers. We need to look at the emotional piece. Like, have we processed through the emotions, or are we just holding them within our body? And that's what a lot of people do, because we're not necessarily taught as kids how to express ourselves in a healthy way, right? And then there's the mindset and the mental pathways, which are created. I think we talked about this last week, but from the moment that you were born until now, where our brains are absorbing everything, right? And so like, right now I'm at this beautiful vacation Airbnb, and like, Ashley, if you were here right beside me, you and I would be experiencing way different things because of the way our brains are constructed, right? And so that's like just mind-blowing in and of itself. And then there's like the spiritual connection and the spiritual work here too. And so whatever are programmed in our mind to believe, or I guess it's really down to your beliefs and like what you're attracting, that can definitely influence the actions, but it can also not just influence the actions, but the result. Right? So like you can be taking the actions, but then if you haven't changed the energetic frequency at which like you are coming from, then the actions might actually not work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this totally makes sense. And it's just this, I'm laughing because this is like the perfect selling point of what coaching is, right? Like this is like the deep work that we do in coaching. And it kind of pulls into question for me, like what coaching is versus what coaching isn't, and what people come thinking that they're getting out of coaching, but like really like what's actually happening when you kind of like pull the curtain behind and say, hey, this is what coaching actually is. And they're like, oh shit, I actually have to like turn the light on inside and like do some deep work.
Yeah, it's I think it's really shocking to people when they realize like, oh, what? Like I'm supposed to be doing the work, like I'm supposed to be answering these questions and like reflecting on this, like what am I paying you for, you know? So let's go there. Let's dive into like what is true coaching. Let's put some parameters around that. And then what isn't coaching? Do you have thoughts on and or anything you want to share around what true coaching is?
So what's coming up for me is just I'm going about this like kind of in a weird way, but I think I don't get my backup. I get kind of like, oh, interesting. When people call themselves a coach, but what they're actually doing is like mentoring and giving advice, because I'm like, that's not like what true coaching is. Now, the caveat to this is they can totally be like a mentor coach or an advising coach. And I feel like as long as they state that and they're clear about like what their role is and that they're using still this coach approach, which I guess is the bigger question, like what is the coach approach? I'm okay with it. But when people say like, oh, I'm a coach, and then like you jump into like their coaching call or whatever, and you're listening and it's like, you're just sitting here giving advice and telling people what to do. There's like not really any coaching that's happening in here. That's when I kind of like get my backup. So when I think, okay, so going back to like, what is coaching? Coaching clearly is not mentoring. It's not therapy. It's not counseling. Like we're not sitting in the past. Now we visit the past. We have to learn from it, but we're not sitting trying to like unpack it. It's more has this like future orientation. Like we're always trying to move the client towards like, you know, the present, but more the future. Like what's the goal? Like what's the purpose of why they're showing up to coaching? Right. Yeah. Love to hear your thoughts on this.
I love what you bring up there. I really want to dive deeper into those distinctions because what I have found is a lot of business coaches will use coaching questions to then consult you, right? And tell you how you should do things and strategies and all that jazz. And just speaking from my own experience, you sit there sometimes as a client and you're like a deer in the headlights, right? Because you're just like listening to them talk and talk and talk and talk about this strategy that maybe you've tried before, or a strategy that you're not even interested in trying, or whatever it might be that is just like, you know, may or may not be applicable to you. And so it's just really fascinating. So we'll dive deeper into those distinctions in a second. But what is true coaching? In my mind and from what I've learned is we are not there as a professional coach to tell you how to do things, to give you advice or to counsel you. We are here to pull the answers from you because our belief system as a coach is that everybody has the answers for themselves within themselves. We see our clients as the experts of their life and as the experts of their career. Right. And so a lot of the work that we do, especially like when we're working with, you know, executives, managers, leaders, but even in business, right? Like my clients have the answers within them. It's not my job to go to them and be like, hey, like you should be a confidence coach, because it sounds to me like what you're doing is confidence coaching. And I don't know if anybody can relate to this, but there is such a big difference when somebody tells you how to do something versus like you coming to the answer on your own. What's your experience like with that?
Yeah, I think I was alluding to that before when I was just talking about like, you know, the gas tank method, like just filling them, pumping them with information as opposed to them being able to kind of, yeah, come to things by themselves. I think something else you said that got me thinking is like, we're here to hold the process for people to help do the heavy lifting, like to find, like to do their own discovery work and make those connections for themselves that don't come from us, like as advice, like, oh, I see this for you. Now, we've obviously learned through like our credentialing in the process that like, of course, we're allowed to offer insights. And I think, there's like a bit of our intuition, like we learn to kind of go with those intuitive nudges and bring those into the coaching conversation. But at the end of the day, we're here to help support the client through their own discovery. And it's funny because not all coaches feel that way, that like the client has the answers. And I'm kind of like dumbfounded. I'm like, well, like, how does that make sense? Like, if they don't have the answers, then who? Like, what are you saying about like yourself as a person? Like, I don't know. I struggle with that one, but I've seen that come up in one coaching methodology that I followed. It's like, no, the clients, like, they don't have their own answers. And like, that's what we're here for as coaches. And I'm like, wait, but how does this work? So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
But then how do you know what answer to give them in that methodology?
Well, this is the thing. It's more about like surface behavioral change. So as long as they're changing their behavior and
then they're good.
Then they're good. So like going back to that thoughts, feelings, actions, results, it's all about that action. But how far is that really going to get you?
It's like what we were talking about. So one of our peers and alumni from the Coach Approach Academy, Bree, who she'll be coming on a podcast episode in a few weeks from now. Remember that analogy she was using in the accelerator in one of our group calls, where it's like if you have shit and all you do is like to get rid of the shit smell, you spray perfume and then you look up. So, oh, the shit doesn't exist anymore, but you haven't actually gotten rid of the shit. You've just covered it up like a Band-Aid solution. And so to actually get rid of the pile of shit, you've got to do some digging, literally, right? And figuratively, but you do have to do the digging within, because for us in our coach training academy, in our Coach Approach Academy, the coach training academy that we facilitate, like lasting change doesn't come from simply changing the action.
Right.
Because what happens, actually, this is a great point, but if we don't do that underlying work to provide not a Band-Aid solution, if we don't change the thoughts and the behaviors and the feelings and all of that stuff, then we actually might be setting our clients up for failure, because then our client becomes like, I guess their motivator is, well, they're being held accountable by us. But then that's how we create a stream of repeat clients, which is great financially, but that's not actually our role as coaches either. We're not here to have lifelong clients. Some clients might choose to work with us because we're great coaches, but the approach that we try to take is like change the mentality, change the belief systems, change the wiring of the brain so you can change the actions, but then you can like move so much further with that on your own than needing to pay a coach or therapist or whoever for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And I think that as people like undertake that work and they maybe like, let's say, solidify, like, oh, I've worked through this and I'm good, something else comes up, right? Like they uncover something else that it's like, oh, okay, now this has exposed this and this is what I want to work on, which is why, like when you go back to the neuroscience, we know that it doesn't just happen. It's not an overnight thing. Like there's some days, like it takes like a couple coaching calls to like really unveil that. And when that happens when you're working with a client, right? And you see that happens. But then when that shift happens, almost always something else comes out of that, because it's like this big unearthing for them. And that's why, typically you have them in a container for 3, 6, 12 months, whatever it is. But it's not that they're working with you on the same thing. Like that, right, would be disservice to the client, is them coming back for 3 months on the same topic.
Well, and so I'm wondering if we can even put this into concrete, like give an example. of how this might show up like in with a coaching client. So I'm thinking, let's say that a mom, for example, because I know this happens a lot with moms, is struggling to put up boundaries or manage her time. And she's like, I just need more time for myself. I just need more time for myself. I just need more time for myself. And okay, well, why don't you take like 5 to 10 minutes in the morning? There's your time for yourself. Now go do it. Be accountable, right? Like I'll hold you accountable. Okay, well, she takes that 5 to 10 minutes every morning for herself, but she's still feeling the weight on her shoulders of having all the responsibilities and taking on all the crap and doing all of the things for everybody, right? So all we've done is work on that action of like taking 5 to 10 minutes for yourself. Checkbox, you have that time for yourself. What's the problem? The problem is actually that you are used to taking on everything, right? And I think especially as women who care, women who, you know, want to support other people, we take on a lot of other people's shit, but we're also like, we take on a lot of that supporter role, right? And so if we're not careful about what we're actually committing to, and we're not making the behavioral change, not just the action change, but like getting to the root of like, why do we take on all of this responsibility? Why do we feel the need to sacrifice ourselves for the sake of others? Then, you know, I don't know, charging like 5 to 10K, let's say, because coaching's not cheap, just to like help you wake up earlier in the morning or take that 5 to 10 minutes, but you're not actually getting to the, okay, what's actually going to help me feel more free? Does that feel like clear? And if not, or so, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, that is clear. It made me think of our conversation from last time where we talked about too, like, what does it look like for someone to show up to coaching? Like, not like what, like, where do they have to be in order to receive coaching, but they have to know and be willing that they have to put in their part, right? And I guess this does go back to, how do you understand what coaching is? Because if you're someone, and if you can communicate as a coach exactly what you're doing for someone and holding this process, and you know that the work is going to be on the client, you know, you need to communicate that, then the client knows that they have a responsibility to show up. And I've seen this in clients before where, you know, earlier on when I wasn't as great as communicating, you know, what coaching is. And then it's like, oh, I can see how this is showing up because they think that I'm here to do the heavy lifting, and they can just sit back. It's like, no, you have to be an active contributor in your own life, right? Like, you're showing up to coaching, but this isn't a one-way road.
Yeah, I love that. Can you share more when you say the work, like you have to do the work? What is that work? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. Wow, that is a really good question. I'm trying to think how I can give it to you in terms of like an example, like a more concrete example. Okay, you have a client that comes to you that's like stressed, burnt out, like they're literally at the end of the road. They know that if they continue on the same path, like it's going to be burnout, ache, like, or worse. They're already burnt out, but like it's just going to be a complete disaster where they're going to have to maybe go on leave. And you go and you have this coaching conversation with them, and they're kind of like dipping their feet in, and you're trying to get below the surface. But, you know, it's human nature for us not to want to go and to be in these uncomfortable positions and have to like look at ourselves and say, wow, I'm really neglecting myself here, or I have a limiting belief about my own, and I'm just giving these as examples, but about my own ability to give self-care to myself and create that space for myself. So instead, it kind of comes up in coaching sometimes potentially as like a resistance. So that work is being open to like what's coming up. And when the coaching conversation ends, for me, it's not over. Like, there's a piece as a client, at least for me, and maybe I'm curious to know if you feel the same, because I feel like the clients that I work with, it's not like we have a coaching call and we get off the call and it's like 2 weeks until we meet again and you like, that's it. you're thinking about that. You're like, it's in your mouth. If you're a wine connoisseur, you're swishing it around, like what's coming up, the thoughts. I tell people to carry a notebook or a diary or a journal, and I say to them, if I ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, because how many times, you get somewhere and it's like, wow, I've never thought of that, and if you can't come to the answer, then like take that away. Like that's like the work that you can do for yourself. And I'm not saying for everybody, we've heard like the dark night of the soul, like the shadow work. And in essence, it kind of is that. And maybe that language doesn't resonate with everybody, but there is this piece that like, if you're really wanting to get the most out of coaching and you have to show up for yourself. You have to be willing to not just think that you're going to show up, get this miracle answer or miracle something that's going to make you execute on this and you walk away. It's like, this is like, coaching is a journey. It's a journey. That's what it comes down to. Are you committed to it? Are you willing to show up for yourself?
I was just thinking like coaching is a journey, but it's also a lifestyle, right? Because it doesn't, you're right. It doesn't end after you get off of a coaching call. I remember when I was first like doing coach training, I was having light bulb moment after light bulb moment after light bulb moment, because my brain was engaged. And there's science around this. They've done research where when they're asking clients, they put like the electrodes on the head to map like the brain and to see what's triggering what. So when they ask coaching conversations, the part of the brain that is responsible for problem solving lights up, versus if they just sit somebody in front of like a computer or a lecturer, their brain is not firing the same way, right? So they have literal evidence for this to show that coaching questions actually help us rewire our thinking and actually engage in problem solving. So you're actually not only going to rewire the connections for yourself and be able to change your reality, your circumstances, all of that, but you're also an active participant in solving your own problems instead of like somebody just prescribing you a method, which is what we've grown up with, right? I don't know about you, but I grew up with people telling me how to do things. Like in school, they don't ask you questions. The only questions they ask you is to see if you're right or wrong. And if you're wrong, you look like a dumbass and feel stupid, right? So coaching is like this whole other world. And I love what you were saying around like, you have to be open. And it's like, you're not going to get much out of coaching unless you are open to really looking at your stuff. And the ego, and when you talk about that resistance, our egos are here to protect us and they're here to help us survive. And we can be grateful for the ego. Like, thank you for, making me feel defensive or whatever. I don't want to look like an idiot in front of these people. I want to be socially accepted. But we have to really work with that ego and really observe it, I think, when it comes up, to help us work through resistance so that we can be open to finding the solutions to our problems or our challenges and working on, creating better results for ourselves, whether that's personally in your career, your business, your life, with your family, whatever it is. So we've talked a little bit about what true coaching is from our perspective. Is there anything else you want to add to that? Like, our definition is pretty loosey, and maybe next time we can come back with like what the real definition is. But I wanted to really speak to our experiences today.
Yeah. Well, I think this might be a good segue to talk about like the governing bodies, because I think that that helps. So when we're thinking, I'm just going to toss this out there, the International Coaching Federation, right? They help define coaching, I think, too, through their ethics and through their core competencies, like how you're supposed to show up as a coach, what coaching really does. Like that, obviously, all of those things kind of help define what coaching is. You have an ethical responsibility. And I guess this can also segue into, should coaching be something that's regulated? I don't know if we want to jump and go into that, but right? Like, what is the purpose of having like a governing body around how I don't want to say how it dictates what coaching is, but how it kind of has its parameters around how coaching should look, the type of things that should happen in a coaching conversation.
Totally. And I feel like that's such a big conversation. So I guess maybe we can touch on like the basics of it and everything that we're talking about today. Like I remember I was studying for the exam because you have to take an exam that is, it pretty much tests you on your knowledge of the core competencies and the code of ethics with the International Coach Federation, which these things are here to protect us, not only as coaches, but to protect our clients as well. Because, you know, it's truly, once I got into this industry and saw all of the flaws, which there are many. So we're going to dive into those maybe next week. There's a lot with any industry, I think. But I really started to see how vulnerable people, like clients, can really become because coaching is a safe space, right? We create a really safe space. But in order to create that safe space, we have to be super in alignment with ethics, right? With an ethical process. And yeah, so I think in my experience, it's really like, you know, being accredited or certified with the International Coaching Federation is helpful in the sense that you have something to abide by and you have like rules and regulations and standards. And as a client, if, you know, a coach is not coaching you in the way that is like outlined with the International Coach Federation, you can actually go to the International Coach Federation and you can complain just as a client to know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I know we like you and I have had like side conversations about this too, because essentially exactly what you said, it holds us to a standard, right? Where, you know, we know that there's an ethics that we have to abide by, and it's not to protect just us as the coach. That is a piece of it, but it's more about like the client and a lot of their core competencies, right? Like it's about like partnering with the client. It's not about like leading. It's about like holding that space and partnering with them in the process. So it holds us, it grounds our approach. So we're not just showing up and just like willy-nilling it. Like there is actually, you know, A, B, C, D, E, F, G in coaching. It's not like we just show up and like, hey, I'm a coach. And like, this is, you know, like, let's coach through this. It's like, well, no, like there's things that need to happen in a conversation. I think I was sharing with you before another methodology in coaching that I've done that isn't accredited through the ICF. I now, as someone who's, you know, getting credentialed with the ICF, I can see how different that conversation looks. And I'm like, wow, there's a big piece that's missing here. That's not included. Now, what does that mean? Is it a bad thing? Not necessarily, but I think it's losing a big piece that could potentially be helpful to the client, right? To the client, to their process, to what they've showed up for. So I'm not always saying credentialing needs to be the thing, but it is nice to have this framework and, you know, just kind of like this guidance of like how you're supposed to show up. Like, how can you be there for yourself as a coach, but mainly for the client?
Yeah, and it really it helps to put things into like just those not boundaries, but like standards and put structure because coaching can be such a loosey-goose, you know, conversation. And it's so crazy. Like when I get on a call with my coach who I'm working with right now, who's a business coach, I don't know what certification she's done, but maybe we can go through actually next week, like more on, you know, certifications, because I know there are a lot of different options out there. And to be honest, there are some options out there that are accredited by ICF that I'm like, that's kind of, I don't know about that, you know? But I can feel the difference. Like I have been coached before following the coach approach system, like the 5 steps to the coaching conversation, and the epiphanies, the results, the impact of that conversation is like tenfold compared to a conversation that's all over the place. Like I just got off of a coaching call yesterday with my coach, and it was like we talked about like 10 different things, and I can tell you like within the last 15 minutes we talked about what I really needed to talk about. But had there been, or if there was a process in place, you know, to get clear on, okay, what's most important today? And what are we taking away today? And how do we need to get from A to B, right? Then yeah, I believe that the coaching conversations would be a lot more productive. And I definitely have a lot of experience in seeing this. And it's not to say that, it's a waste of time and money. I mean, I think things can always be improved. And even as a certified coach, I'm not perfect. I think we always have things to work on, and any true coach is going to recognize that. But I don't even remember what we were talking about. But essentially, the International Coach Federation, it puts that structure in place to be able to explore, but to know that at the end of the conversation, you are going to walk away with what you came to the conversation with. And if it's not exactly that, it's going to be exactly what you needed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Cool. So yeah, there's a ton of different governing bodies, and maybe I need to actually do more research, because I'm going to be honest, I only know about ICF, but there's a lot of different governing bodies that you can be a part of. And yeah, maybe we can touch quickly on the differences between coaching, mentoring, counseling / therapy versus consulting and teaching.
This is interesting because there's certain coaching methodologies that I've seen out there where teaching is like not an option. But I've also seen, like, I know this is kind of confusing to describe and maybe not even getting at what we're getting at, but you can have a coach approach and teach. Like, right, there's programs that have been created that a program you teach through, but then you have a coach approach to like either like a group coaching or one-on-one. But there's other coaching methodologies that I've been exposed to where like teaching, like there's zero space for that.
So in true coaching, when you're true coaching, we follow the 80-20 rule. And I find that, okay, so the coach is, if you look at a recording of a coaching call, the coach should only be speaking 20% of the time. And the client is to speak 80% of the time. But I actually find the opposite is true when somebody doesn't have true coaching skills. And there, you can always take a coach approach to anything that you do. And I think that taking a coach approach to anything that you do will probably actually elevate the experience, like whether you are working in a corporate job or, I don't know, any job. Like literally, I think everybody can benefit from coaching skills. But true pure coaching is that 80-20 rule. The coach is holding the process, and the coach asks questions. And in the Coach Approach Academy, we teach a 5-step process so that you understand what part of the conversation you're in, because there's, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you kind of need to know, okay, like what kinds of questions am I asking at which time? Like what part, there's certain things that will help you to identify what part of the conversation you're in. We talk about, okay, how do we help our clients overcome obstacles? How do we create clarity? I'm going backwards here. How do we create clarity around what it is that they desire? How do we, overcome those obstacles? And then we always talk about, action as well. And there's other steps of the conversation, but pure coaching has that I wouldn't even call it a framework, but that structure. And then you kind of flow within that structure. Now, if we're talking about mentoring would be like somebody giving advice. So maybe you go to your coach or whoever it is that you're paying for support, and you tell them what's going on, and you tell them, your problems or whatever. And they would give you advice based on where they've come from or what they've tried or what's worked for them. And I actually find that in the business world, because I've, been in business for over 5 years now, a lot of business coaches are actually mentoring. They're not actually coaching, or they use a combination, but they'll ask you, I think I was saying this earlier, they'll ask you questions to understand where you're at so that they can provide you with a solution. But like we were saying earlier as well, when you actually ask the client and you exhaust all of your resources in asking them and really getting to what it is for them and trying to get your client to come up with an answer that's true for them, then not only are you helping, you're actually serving your client way more than if you were to tell them. But where was I going with that? I forget. I've lost my train of thought. Anything to add?
Yeah. I was just going to add in something kind of for people who are listening to this and thinking, oh, like there's a lot of talk around like what you do in coaching and what you don't do, but like how does this actually transpire? And like, is there not a place for mentoring? And so I just wanted to add in that like even though coaching isn't mentoring, it's not counseling, it's not therapy, it's not consulting, it's not teaching. There's moments within a coaching call, like a coaching conversation, that you can offer things to clients, but it's up to them to take it or leave it. So, if I'm picking up on something, that a coach is struggling with something and I could, say, Joanne, like, can I offer you something? And if they contractually agree to that, then as a coach, I can use, take off my coaching hat and offer them something. But it's my responsibility to then put on and make sure that this is distinct. I'm stepping out of my coaching hat realm to give you this. Now I'm putting my coaching hat back on, and what's coming up for you around that, right? So there is like these little moments. So I just wanted to make that clear so that people don't think, oh my God, like how does this actually transpire? Like it's not that there's a wiggle room, but there's these moments. And I think that when you get to the different levels of coaching, right? Like if we're talking about the Coach Approach Academy and we're thinking about there's foundations and there's mastery, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later in another podcast, but you dive into those like different skills of how can you show up and offer those moments to the client, but you always have to come back into your coaching self, put the coaching hat back on to then further partner with the client.
Yes, absolutely. And we, like you said, we teach how to do that because there is a way to do that abides in air quotes by true coaching, right? But not just abides by what I found with the International Coach Federation is those standards are literally there for a reason. It's because they work. It's because they're effective, right? So, excuse me, when you ask your client for permission to share something that's worked for you, share an observation, share feedback, share a tip, if they agree to it, it's actually more likely that they're going to accept that versus reject it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And like take something out of what you're offering as opposed to you just offering. And they're like, geez, like none of this resonates. Like,
exactly.
Like, hey, can I just take a second? And then they're more like, oh, okay. Like,
yeah. So, okay. So that's peer coaching versus mentoring. And then counseling therapy we touched on, right? It's all about the past and like, going into the past and processing the past. And what there's different ways you can take a coach approach to therapy as well. And I actually think it would be very beneficial because I've heard I know therapists are different across the board. Same with coaches, same with mentors, same with counselors. Counselors, consultants, teachers. But if you take a coach approach to therapy, then we're not hanging out in the past and like being a victim of our past, but we're able to really step into our power. Like, okay, this is what happened in the past. Okay, like let's process through that. And also, what do we want to do with that? Like, how do we want to move forward? How can we move through this instead of hanging out stuck back there? I've actually heard of a lot of people who have gone through therapy that have, they've just felt stuck. They're like, man, I was such a victim before. Like I was really just like processing and reprocessing that trauma. And it's like, okay, like you don't actually need to go through it that frequently to process it, move through it, and then move on. I don't know what your experience has been though.
Yeah, I think it's really cool so I've been seeing a therapist, I guess, psychotherapist for a while now. I love it. And I think she kind of like merges, like she's very spiritual. You'd actually probably really like her too. But she's also open. And I think she uses a bit of a coach approach to her therapy practices. So it is about going back and like we process through trauma. But then lately we've been kind of like doing more conversational pieces that are like forward thinking. Like, so, you've had this experience that's happened to you in the present. and obviously you want a different outcome. Where did this come from? And then how can we kind of move that back through like forward?
Yeah.
So it's cool when people can like merge these two together, but distinctively, coaching versus therapy is completely different.
Totally. And we say in coaching too that like you can dip your toe in the past, but you're not hanging out there, right? And I've been told by my peers that I tend to take more of a therapeutic approach in coaching because it could be because of my psychology background. But I'll definitely hang out in the past and like help my clients process through things because I think it's important to verbalize things, especially if you've never been able to verbalize that before, right? But we have like we all have those clear distinctions because if it's turning into something where it's like, whoa, like as a coach, I am not trained to help you process through that trauma, then we have ways of dealing with that conversation, dealing with that client and maybe recommending or what is that word when you refer to somebody else or you have to, if you're not competent to help somebody, it is unethical to continue to try to help them, right? If you don't have the training that's required. And this isn't to say that you need to be an expert in their field because in true coaching, you're not required to be an expert in any field to help somebody with what they're going through because you're asking questions and you're getting curious. But if it's a topic that's like, if a client's suicidal or if they are going through a divorce and all of your coaching conversations are about divorce, but you came here to talk about business, you have to recontract and you have to come back and be like, okay, this is what you came to me for. But I sense that maybe this isn't the right time to go through this. Can I recommend that maybe you seek support from like a therapist or it sounds like you're needing this? And then you have a conversation about that.
Yeah, this is where I see the benefit of credentialing as well, because this is something that the International Coaching Federation, as part of your core competencies in being a coach, you have to be able to know when you need to refer out a client where appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a skill, right? It's a skill to know, like, am I going into that territory? Like, I'm right now working with some clients who are youth who have gone through homelessness. So they've got like tons of stories. The majority of them have been through like therapy and counseling and CBT, DBT, all these things. And occasionally, we'll be in a coaching conversation and then, they bring something up that's like heavily like rooted in their past. And I have to, check myself and make sure like, okay, like, I'm recognizing this and I'm hearing you on that. This is something that you can take back to your therapist if you feel called to. But from a coaching perspective, how then can we continue to move the conversation forward? So it's like, and you learn these skills through a program like the Coach Approach Academy, right? Where it's like, how can you still show up, partner with the client, acknowledge what's happening, refer out and say that this is out of like the context for today, but then, move forward in like staying true to the coaching conversation, which
absolutely
sometimes be tricky.
Yeah. And, a lot of people say like, oh, I have really great life experience to bring to the table. I have really great this to bring to the table. Like I can be a coach. And honestly, coaching is not about your life experience. Like you might have a natural ability to coach and lead, but the process and knowing like where the lines are, right? This is a professional industry and people are sensitive, people are vulnerable, and we need to know where the boundaries are. I remember this one time, a peer of mine was struggling with fertility and I asked her a question in the DMs on Instagram. And she didn't answer. And I was like, fuck, I should have asked for permission first because I was asking based on like, I want to help her and I have something like, I believe that I can help her through this. But that question, she came back and she was like, sorry, like I couldn't answer that question. I couldn't even go there mentally because, I just need to focus on launching my program. I cannot go down a rabbit hole right now and process like trauma or this or that or whatever, you know? And I thought that my question was empowering, but it wasn't at that time because there was no permission. And so that's why it's so key for me as well to, I always flip flop. I'm like, should the coaching industry be regulated? I don't know. But then I always come back, like when I think about it and when I speak on it, it's like, yes, we do need guidelines and we do need boundaries, because if we're just out there asking people questions because we feel like we can help them, we're actually doing a disservice. Coaching is so much about like the permission, and it's a co-creative process, and it's so beautiful. But it's definitely a skill that I don't think I would have learned in an online setting without like in the Coach Approach Academy, we have our online program. But we do a lot of calls and a lot of practice, and it's a lot of face-to-face, like, let's get you in, let's practice those questions, let's process and reflect and give feedback, and I just find that I haven't taken many other coaching programs because I'm like, I already know they're not going to be that great, which is maybe not the best, but I am interested in taking more and just learning about what else is out there. But yeah, this isn't something that you can learn over a weekend or in a self-study.
Yes. Yeah.
Course.
I've done a self-study and I was like, what the fuck was that? Like, I'm sorry. It was just, I couldn't, okay. So this actually brings me to a really good question that I wanted to bring up around, because we're talking about like the Coach Approach Academy and we're talking about the International Coaching Federation.
Right.
So like, how are these different for like, people who are listening, and like, how are these different? Like, what do they both offer? What do they both do? Like, obviously they're related, but they're so different.
Right. Yes. Great question. So the International Coach Federation is a governing body. So they set the guidelines, they set the standards, they give you, so they have the core competencies, which is what makes up coaching conversations. And what the Coach Approach Academy teaches you is essentially a 5-step process that is mapped to the core competencies. So you don't actually have to. I remember when I was studying for my exam, I was like, fuck, I've never looked at the core competencies. I have no idea what they are. But when I was reading through them, I'm like, oh, duh, I've learned all of this. And it's because the way that we teach coaching, it's literally mapped to the core competencies. You're just not aware that you're learning all of the core competencies until you look at them and then you're like, duh, I know all of this. Because the way in which we teach is through coaching and engaging, right? We engage the brain instead of just being like, here, go study this. We practice, we provide feedback. And that experiential learning is so foundational when it comes to nailing your coaching skills and getting better as a coach. I find that there are those self-study coaching programs out there, like the like, take this coaching program in a week. I just saw one come up for $10 a month. You can become a certified coach. And I'm like, no, that is like, there is no program that is going to give you what you need as feedback, as experience, as practice that will prepare you for the conversations that you're going to have as a coach, and that will help you to get the results that your clients can really get. So the International Coach Federation is the governing body, and then Coach Approach Academy is a school, right, that you can get everything that you need. So you get your 60 hours of coach training. You can get your mentor coaching, which you need 10 hours of mentor coaching. And that's where you're going to study the core competencies and the code of ethics to actually prepare you for the exam. And then from there, you graduate from the Coach Approach Academy and you go on to take your exam. You go on to submit, and the exam's relatively easy. It's just multiple choice. Well, it was easy for me, but you take your exam, you submit a demo, and what else? Oh, you have to complete your 100 hours of practice coaching, and you can apply for your associate certified coach credential with the International Coach Federation. So the Coach Approach Academy doesn't accredit you in and of itself, but it gives you the training that you need to apply for your certification. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I would almost not challenge you on that, but they give you an accreditation. Like you leave, it's not an ICF.
You have a certificate.
You get a
You have the certificate.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the certificate is what I'm
Yeah.
referring
So
to.
you're certified under but you're not certified under the International Coach Federation. So you have,
Right.
so, okay. So when I took coach training and I was in the process of applying for my first credential as a coach under the International Coach Federation, I was calling myself what was I calling myself? What do you call yourself as a PhD student when you don't have your PhD
Oh,
yet?
a candidate.
Yes.
Candidate.
ACC candidate. Yeah, that's what I was calling myself because I had the training hours, right? So you can say I have coach training. I've graduated from the Coach Approach Academy, but you're not technically certified under the governing body, which is the International Coach Federation, until you apply for one of your credentials. So it's the same as if you were to become a therapist, right? But I don't know if there's different differentiations or even a doctor. I mean, I know the study and the schooling is way different, but you have to specialize. And in coaching, you don't have to specialize. You can. But so as a doctor, you have to specialize in like different areas or whatever. But before that, you go through your doctor things and then you become a
resident
and then you become a whatever the heck you are, right? So it's in essence, it's kind of similar because you do your training and you take your exam and then you apply to become an associate certified coach. Then you do more training, you do more practice hours, you get paid to be coaching and all of that stuff. You accrue all those hours and then you can apply for your professional certified coach certification. So there's 3 different certifications. And then the next level would be master certified coach. So those are the 3. And you just kind of work your way up as you become more and more experienced and knowledgeable in the coaching industry.
Right. And those are for the International Coaching Federation. Just exactly. To make that caveat.
Yes. Yeah. Great questions. Okay. I feel like that's great for today. How are you feeling? Is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I mean, honestly, my mind's going in so many places. I'm so passionate too about what the Coach Approach Academy has to offer now that I've dipped my toes in some other programs. And maybe we can leave that for next conversation to kind of continue talking about, what is coaching, continuing on with the coaching credentials. And
like why training. And why even get certified, right? Because the coaching industry is not regulated. So anybody can, hang up a sign and be like, I'm a coach. But why would you get certified? If the coaching industry isn't regulated, what are the benefits of getting certified? So we can definitely dive into that. We can talk about the regulation stuff because we have a lot of insights, I think, to speak on about that. And if you have any questions as a listener that you want us to answer, please send them our way. I will drop both of our Instagram links in the comments. And as part of this series, Ashley and I are offering, I mean, we kind of do this anyway, but we are offering 30-minute, what do we call them? Like I have so many discovery calls. I call mine connection calls. So you'll kind of get a taste for coaching. And, if you're interested in the Coach Approach system or the Coach Approach Academy, and becoming a coach, we will answer any questions that you have. And we can definitely help you gain clarity on, where you want to go, what you're doing, whatever it is that you're struggling with. We would love to give you the gift of coaching, complimentary, no strings attached, and just kind of have you try it on for size. Thanks so much for joining me today, Ashley, and we will see you guys in the next episode. Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast today. If you like what you heard, I would love it if you left a review. If you like my vibe, come and hang with me in my Facebook or Telegram group. I'll drop the link to my email list below where you can get instant access. Make sure you check the show notes for any other links that I mentioned today. And until next time, I'm sending you waves of abundance.